Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the first of this year's IIEP Strategic Debates. We're very happy to have you with us. Just while everyone is connecting, I'll go through a few technical points so that everyone's clear on how we're going to run this session. So first of all, this session is available in English, French, and Spanish. So we do invite you to pick your language from the beginning because the language may change throughout the event. You can find your language channel in the little globe that is available on the bottom of your screen. And you can also activate closed captions if you wish to do so. The presentations will also be available in the 3 languages, and my colleagues who are managing the chat will put the link where you'll be able to access those slides in your language. If you have any questions or comments or any issues, please do let us know through the chat. My colleagues will be keeping an eye out, and they'll also be posting messages for you and interesting links. So please activate the chat and keep your eye on that. And we'll also have a Q&A session towards the end of this event. So if you have any questions that you would like to address to our panelists, please also put them in the chat. They'll be collected by my colleagues, and you will have an opportunity to hear from the panelists on those at the end. And finally, please note that this session is being recorded. So on that note, I'm very pleased to hand over to IIEP's director, Martin Benavides, who will introduce to you today's session.
Thank you very much, Camila. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this IIEP first strategic debate for 2025. This year, our debates will focus on promoting learning equity. What does it mean for planners? We are very pleased to partner once again with the UNESCO SDG 4 Global Cooperation Mechanism, but also very happy to partner this year with the Learning Equity Initiative, represented here by Dan and by IIEP, also as part of that initiative. But also, we are very happy to partner with ADEA, the Association for Education Development in Africa. As always, in these strategic debates, across our 4 sessions, you will be hearing from national and international experts, practitioners, academics, and also IIEP staff members with the objective to compare and discuss different perspectives and to learn from each other, from each other's experiences. Today's debate will focus on the question of measuring learning disparities to drive policy changes. We have a very strong team of experts that are going to be introducing this topic to us. The idea of the session is to review the strengths and limits of the data sets currently available, and more importantly, to interrogate their capacity to drive policy change. So I'm going to be introducing each speaker when they have the floor for sharing their ideas. We are going to begin this presentation with Dan Wagner, who is the UNESCO Chair in Learning and Literacy and Professor of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. He's founding director of the International Literacy Institute, co-established by UNESCO and the University of Pennsylvania, founding director of the U.S. National Center for Adult Literacy, and also part of the Penn GSC's International Educational Development Program. Dan is leading the Learning Equity Initiative, so for us it's a pleasure to have him sharing his main ideas. So each speaker will have 6 minutes, and I'm going to be responsible of trying to to have everyone on time. So please, Dan, over to you, and thank you to be with us today.
Thank you so much, Martin, and thank you, everyone. It's exciting to be here on this first debate of this season, and I'm really delighted to be with you. I'm going to share my screen now. Just a moment. So there are, of course, many issues that we couldn't address in areas of learning equity. Today, I'm going to try to focus on what we mean by learning disparities and how something that we call the Gini Learning Index can make a difference in helping us focus on issues of policies that help those kids who are most marginalized in low and middle income countries. I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to make 4 points broadly. So many of us have, if we're a little bit older, have grown up with the MDGs and SDGs around this notion that there's a learning crisis. And increasingly, many of us, I think on this side of the screen, in this particular webinar, are concerned about equity issues, the fact that there are gaps growing between the haves and the have-nots. So I'm going to move, and my second point is on who are these marginalized learners. And third, to introduce to some of you this notion of a Gini coefficient for learning, what we call the Gini Learning Index, which we think will help us identify and impact better learning disparities across the world. And finally, this idea that we can improve planning and policies by having metrics that help us focus on equity issues, leading to a reduction in marginalization. So that's the basic premise of my presentation. So starting here, this learning equity crisis, many of us believe have moved from the general learning crisis, which we became aware of, I think, around around 2000, but even before that, and has moved through the SDGs, and where we have come to understand that even though we've invested a tremendous amount in trying to improve what are now called foundational literacy and numeracy, or simply reading and math, have led still to about 50% of the youth and young children who can't read a single sentence. There are a lot of different ways that those of us who are more expert in this frame the problem, but this gap, we perceive it as widening. And even though today we'll be talking about low-income countries and maybe low-middle-income countries, it's also found in places like the United States. And I'm from Philadelphia, and we talk about similar issues here in Philadelphia. So it's really a global issue. So who are these marginalized learners? What some of us used to call the bottom of the pyramid as a convenient marker. You can see that on the right in this very rough, simplistic graph, but it hasn't changed much over the years. That is, there are lots of people, and majority children and youth, who are in this bottom, however it's defined. And how do they really get there? What are the factors that lead to marginalization? Well, you can see a partial list on the left. Has to do with poverty, has to do with poor teacher training, has to do with low literate or illiterate parents. Many in many countries are from ethno-linguistic minority groups. And increasingly on this list is climate threats. There's work being done at IIEP and elsewhere where this is now entered into our conversation about what constitutes marginalization. By geography, in fact, number 5. So who has talked most about inequality and inequity and how it can be understood? Well, our friends, the economists. And the economists have used a term for really decades called the Gini income or wealth coefficient or index. And in the graph, I realize it's a lot to see in a quick presentation, but many of you have seen this before, where there are a set of Lorenz curves. Just to say that many people point out that South Africa has the highest Gini, the greatest disparity between the richer people and the poorer people. Norway currently is the lowest Gini at 0.23, and then it's a range between 0 and 1.0. And so you can see these curves right here. Here's approximately where South Africa is, and closer to the egalitarian line is Norway, which is a little bit to the left of what this curve is at 0.33. And this curve matters because I'm going to show you in the next slide how learning people would look at the same idea. So these are data collected from Uttar Pradesh State and rural India by the Language and Learning Foundation, many of you know, based in Delhi, but working broadly in India. And they're using reading outcomes by a well-known, similar to the EGRA, many would be familiar in this call, and found that if you essentially plot the same idea that we did in the previous slide around income disparities, you actually find a very interesting disparity in actual data that we collected on a couple thousand kids at about 0.63. This is the same number that you saw in the previous slide for South Africa. And it isn't this data set alone that exhibits this kind of Lorenz curve. In fact, if you go through the literature and the research, most of them show very high Gini coefficients for reading data, which means that big gaps between those who have and those who do not have. So one of the questions is, what would you do in order to close this gap? And this conversation, I would say we're in a preliminary phase. Right now, what we did was undertake a simulation where we essentially raised the floor by putting our resources, our hypothetical resources, into improving scores of the kids only at the bottom of the pyramid. And what happens is, it wouldn't surprise you, that you can raise the entire curve by putting extra resources into the bottom. So we call this raising the floor, and it's just an idea currently because we have data that are currently being collected in other countries. And those of you interested in this kind of coefficient, I would urge you to get in touch with the LEI, or me personally, if you wish, because we're trying to demonstrate how it is that we can help influence how planners and policymakers nationally and internationally working with IAEP closely on this. So by conclusion, my claim is that these kinds of metrics, and including the ones coming up with Pablo, I think, which support somewhat the same approach by looking at inequalities within populations in different countries, we still show, and this is I think the first point is the most dramatic, and that is that there are still huge disparities in learning, maybe growing, we believe growing, after 25 years of the UN goals. This is shocking to those who aren't aware of it. It's depressing to those who've been around for a while. So one way we can, I think, push the agenda toward better policymaking is through Gini Learning Index, this idea that is highly known among economists, but not well known among educators and learning specialists, to focus more on the gaps and the learning disparities, and in particular within subnational groups. And finally, the claim is that we need to provide evidence of this kind, simple to understand, but where ministers of education and their staff can have data that allow them to say, here is how we can invest in learning in order to fulfill our goals of trying to reduce marginalization in our country. So that's the basic point. There are probably different ways to achieve it, but this is one of the ideas we're putting on the table today. Thanks very much. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Dan. Very, very important idea to allocate resources where it's more needed. In the case of the presentation, to the group that is called the bottom of the pyramid. So very interesting idea to be discussed in the following minutes. So continuing with this more global perspective, we will have two colleagues from the UNESCO GEM report, Pablo Fraser, who is the Chief Education Monitoring and Marcela Barrios, data analyst of the Global Education Monitoring report at UNESCO. Please, Pablo, over to you.
Thank you, Martin, and thanks to the IIEP for this wonderful invitation. It's a real pleasure for us to engage in these debates and seminar. And what Marcela and I wanted to show you today is a product that we have that I think is of interest to all of us that work with education and inequalities. So let me share my screen. Let me go to presentation mode. Okay, so what we wanted to do today is to share a resource that we have, which is the World Inequality Database on Education. This is a free online resource that is available that acts like a depository of information regarding access and learning. We have here 23 access indicators that covers completion rates, enrollment rates, but to the topic that we're discussing today, we also have 12 learning indicators, which are assessments to reading, mathematics, science, and youth skills in different levels of education, early grades, at the end of primary, and the end of lower secondary, and what we call youth skills, which measure the skills in the group of 15-year-olds to 24-year-olds. So this is a compilation of information, and you see here in the map that you can see in the right of the screen. This is the coverage that we have for the learning indicators. The blue countries is where we are getting information from. As you see, we still have some challenges to have some information from some regions and countries in the world. But as it stands right now, we feel that we have a very decent coverage of the countries. So this is I go in detail to what you're seeing here, but just to give you a sense of what you're going to encounter, whether you access through a resource through your computer, or you can even access it through your mobile phone. In educationequalities.org, you have access to these little horizontal charts that will show you the average of the percentage of students that are above a certain threshold. For example, what percentage of students are above low performance? What percentage of students are above high performance? And so on and so on. So these charts will show you the percentage of students at a given education level that meets these performance thresholds, and also will give you an insight to certain levels of inequalities. But before going into detail about this, just a recap of the information that we have here. Like I said, the WIDE website is a depository information. What we do here is to collect information that are produced by different agencies, and we put it in one single place for you to have like an holistic perspective of world trends and world diagnostics for different countries and regions. So you see here that we collect the information from all the major large-scale assessment, PISA, PEARLS, TIMSS, but we also have collect information from regional assessments, like the PASEC, which are Francophones, sub-Saharan countries, TERCE, Latin American countries, and the SEA-PLM, which is our Southeast Asian countries. For the youth literacy skills, we have collected information from the NICS and the HS questionnaires, and we also have national assessments, which are too many to list here, that are developed by the own countries that are willing to share this information with us, and we also published in the website. So you see here, we have a scope of different sources and information. Now, when you go to our website, you can choose different indicators where you can see data. You can choose the reading learning achievement for early grades, for primary or for lower secondary. You can do the same thing with mathematics or science. So you have the choice of multiple indicators. Then you can choose which is the average that you can see. You can, like I mentioned before, you can choose the percentage of children that are above low proficiency, that are above the minimum proficiency, above medium or high proficiency. I have to say here that although we have these different levels that you can choose, the only level that is comparable internationally and across different tests is the minimum proficiency level. The second, the one that is marked here in the screen. And how is this comparable? Well, we actually had a meeting with all the agencies that are that work in this large-scale assessment, and we reached an agreement. We basically reached an agreement that we're going to make the assumption that no matter the different methodological procedures behind each test, we're going to convey that the minimum proficiency level is going to be comparable across countries and across tests. So the percentage of students classified as meeting the minimum proficiency level in PISA can be compared to the percentage of students that reach that category in TEAMS or in PEARLS and so on. And also, you can select how you want this data to be disaggregated. And I think here is crucial. And I think here's the really value of why. Because we understand inequalities in multiple dimensions from different sources. So you can see here that you can break down the results by gender, by location, urban or rural, by wealth, or by what language do students speak at home. So by this type of breakdown that we provide, we try to tackle the issue that inequality has different sources, and therefore different policy measures are warranted. Here we have a short.
We have to move fast, Pablo. Maybe two more minutes.
Yes, I'm finishing. This is just a short video of telling you how to navigate the web page. And I want to move on with an example. Can you see, Martin, can you tell me if you see the web page?
Yes. Okay. Morocco.
So we see the example of Morocco. So you see, for example, here, the results for primary, for access, but to our topic, we reach to learning. And you see here how many kids are above the minimum proficiency level in the black diamond. And you can choose where you want to focus. For example, let's focus on gender. And then you see the gender disparities for each of the results of Morocco. Or if you want, you can focus on wealth, on the richest and the poorest quintile. And it will show you the results for Morocco for primary, lower secondary. So it's quite practical. You can navigate. It's very easy to, and here's the whole selection of countries that you can choose from to select the information. You also have the chance to see all the countries lumped together, as you see here. This is the results for learning achievement mathematics. And you can see the comparison. Let's choose, for example, location. And you can see the disparities by urban and rural across different countries where we have data. So The whole point of this tool is to be easy to manage resource. There's also a section in this webpage where you can download the data and you can manipulate it yourself and work with yourself. But we intend to have visuals easy to understand so that practitioners, policymakers, or people that take decisions can have very easy access and quick access to important information that can let them to take decisions on how to intervene in their context. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Pablo and Marcela. Very, very important resource, which is free and will allow us to make good comparison between different indicators for different countries. Thank you to the GEM team then for this presentation. And now we're going to be moving to look at more regional perspective. We will begin with Alejandro Ibáñez, who is part of the Southeast Asia Ministries of Education Organization, the CMO, based in Bangkok, Thailand. Alejandro leads the SEA-PLM team, the first regional large-scale learning assessment and capacity building program designed to monitor and improve student learning outcomes in the Pacific region. So over to you, Alejandro. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Martin. And thank you so much, IIEP, for this wonderful invitation. It's my pleasure to share in the table the voices from Southeast Asia in our experience in looking at set of learning indicators that measures foundational learning systems. So I'll be drawing specifically on the Southeast Asia primary learning metrics, which is one of the things that Pablo mentioned in his presentation. So CPLM, just a quick background, we are a regional large-scale learning assessment and capacity building program in Southeast Asia. We are owned by and for Southeast Asian countries. That means in terms of developing tools, approaches, models, and data, we are here to provide information to ministries of education in the region in order to advance and forward evidence-based policy making. So we do assess grade 5 students' literacy and numeracy, looking at cognitive skills on reading, writing, and mathematics. And we also do contextual questionnaires for students, parents, teachers, and school leaders. As Pablo mentioned, we are part of the broader international large-scale assessment community, which aims to report on SDG global goal reporting. In particular, we are here to report on SDG 4.1.1b, which looks at minimum proficiency at the end of primary education for both reading and mathematics. We already had successfully completed 2 cycles. The first cycle happened in 2019 with 6 countries, and now in our second cycle in 2024, we have able to gather data from 7 countries and being able to generate comparative results and trend analysis in order to assess pre- and post-pandemic context of education systems in Southeast Asia. What you're seeing right now is a set of proficiency scales that we were able to develop based on a set of indicators culled from the curriculum audit that we did across the ministries of education in Southeast Asia. And so this proficiency scales emphasizes that learning is a progression. That means the learning process goes through sets of stages from the most basic task, from the most complex skills across different areas and different learning specific domains. And so what we're seeing here, based from the 2019 cycle, is that there is, of course, huge variance in Southeast Asia, where many countries are in both extreme ends of the scale. In fact, the data is very compelling. You have 7 out of 10 children in Southeast Asia cannot read a basic text. And if this trend continues, we have fewer than 10% of students in Southeast Asia on average won't be able to reach the SDG 4.1.1b goal. And so aside from or beyond the scores that we are assessing, we're also looking at context or understanding the context. And what you're seeing here is our contextual framework in looking at how environment and the social landscape affects the learning process. And so we have instituted tools such as similar with other international RGL assessments. We do develop tools looking at students, parents, schools, and teachers' context, workforce conditions, and many other areas that drives improvement and learning inside and outside the classroom. Just to give you a quick example of our framework on capturing context of mental health and well-being, for example, where we do understand that the environment and learning are bidirectionally affecting each other. That means the learning is both an outcome and a driver of actually improving learning outcomes inside and outside the school. So we have produced different thematic reports since the 2019 cycle, and you can see all the reports available online in our website, where we were able to extract and come up with the regional report, but also highlight some of policy issues cutting across the learning cycle. You have looking at low-performing readers, the gender disparities, and looking at teacher workforce conditions. So just to give a quick snapshot of the findings that we were able to gather in the 2019 cycle, we saw that the Southeast Asia or the region is actually experiencing a double equity challenge, where on one hand, countries are now pressured to reduce the gap between the high achievers and the low performing achievers, but also we are now challenged to narrow the gap between boys and girls because data is very clear. Boys are outperforming girls across the learning domains, and that gap further widens when you further increases the level of complexities. And if you look at different equity indicators, we're seeing a multi-level structural challenge where learners are actually further disadvantaged. So as you can see in our further analysis, it shows that if you are a male, if you are living in a rural area, if you do not speak the language of instruction at home, if you belong to a low SES, you do household responsibilities, you did not attend the preschool, and you have repeated the grade, all of these cumulatively would actually increase you to becoming more disadvantaged. So what we're seeing is a multi-level of barriers and challenges that greatly disadvantage children, and that greater increases as more factors comes in. And aside from that, we're looking at social environment. So in the 2019 data, for example, we were able to understand the context happening inside schools where bullying, for example, is very much prevalent in the region. And we saw that the social environment, for example, the context or the safetyness of school is, of course, greatly correlated with academic learning. And so lower reading performances greatly is very much correlated with greater prevalence of bullying. And so just to give you a quick example of a case study on how the countries are using the SEA-PLM data to drive policy change. So you have here, for example, in Cambodia, they were able to, from the 2019 results, they were able to convert this into a set of policy pointers. So they were able to develop a 10-point policy targets, which lays down a holistic reform action in addressing learning outcomes in Cambodia. In many countries like Myanmar and the Philippines, for example, since the 2019 cycle, they developed series of curriculum reforms that aims to narrow the curriculum that focuses on the foundations. And just to zeroing in on a particular case where in the Philippines, for example, when the data on bullying came out in 2019 and published in 2020, there has been a series of legislative hearings, in particular, the review of the 2013 Senate hearing on the Anti-Bullying Act law, which essentially triggered the Senate to conduct a public hearing in order to understand the law and how the data can be further used. And now this year, when they're now doing the release of the implementing rules and regulations of that law, so that means we're now seeing that data is actually triggering some actions, not only from a technical point of view, but more primarily on the political perspective, where it actually triggers political discussions. And so just to end my presentation, I would want to highlight some points. Essentially, what we're seeing from SEA-PLM is that foundational learning remains a core challenge, and there's a strong need, a critical need for robust data to monitor policy effectiveness and inform interventions. What we're seeing from the data as well is that systemic equity gaps still persist. And this is now triggers or essentially calls for the importance or providing granular data in order for countries to have more tailored, targeted policy action. And finally, contextual equity matters because if we were able to improve context, we should be able to improve learning. So that's all from my end. Thank you very much. Over to you, Martin.
Oh, thank you very much, Alejandro. Very interesting analysis that you propose, and also the idea to link them to policy cases to see how you can use the data for improving policies that you have. No? Thank you very much. Now we are gonna change to the Latin American region. So I'm gonna change also. Voy a pasar a hablar en español. Y tenemos a Alejandro Vera, que actualmente es especialista de programa en la Oficina Regional de UNESCO en Santiago, como jefe del área de
serves as program
política,
specialist of
planeamiento,
UNESCO's regional office in Santiago,
y estoy
and
escuchando
he is head
un audio ahorita, no sé
of the
quién es,
regional monitoring team for the SDG for
y está liderando
Education
el esfuerzo
2030
regional de
agenda.
monitoreo de las SDG4 en contexto de la educación, de la Agenda de la Educación 2030. Muchas gracias, Alejandro, y el turno es tuyo ahora para
Thank you very much, Alejandro. And please, you have the floor for your intervention.
Vamos a aprovechar que hiciste este cambio al español y vamos a hacer la presentación.
Good afternoon, Martin. Hello. Since you have switched to Spanish, I'm going to continue this presentation in Spanish, and I'm going to use this opportunity that is given to me of speaking in Spanish, thanks to interpretation. So if that's okay with you, I'm now going to share my screen. And I'm going to be able to start my presentation.
Muy poco tiempo, así que voy a ir directamente al punto. Estoy aquí para, como decía Martín, para comentar acerca del
We don't have much time, as Martin was saying, and therefore I'm going to try and be as succinct as possible. I'm going to talk to you about the work we've been carrying out with UNESCO in Latin America and the Caribbean. We're going to talk about the assessment of the learning gaps in Latin America. Our study has looked mostly on the comparative study that has been carried out for 30 years in this region. We have carried out 4 such studies, and the latest one is the ERCE 2019. We are currently developing ERCE 2025, and we certainly hope that the results will be made available as early as late 2025, early 2026. This is a study that is carried out in all Spanish-speaking countries, in addition to Brazil, aka 19 countries in Latin America. ERCE is a study that looks at primary education learning, looking specifically at science and reading and writing. We mostly focus on 3rd and 6th years. In other words, 3rd grade, aka 9-year-olds, and 6th grade, 12-year-olds. As my colleague Alejandro was saying, such studies include a number of tests and is also based on a survey that makes it possible for us to study other factors. We can also look at key populations about which we want to know more. It also helps us reach more disaggregated data, as my colleague Pablo was saying. The information that we reap through the ERCE study can be disaggregated by population based on a number of criteria. You have here a disaggregation for ERCE 2019. This is a very standard one. It has to do with gender, income level, geographical settings of the school, depending on whether they are located in rural or urban areas. This particular index has to do with the early grade reading assessment that Pablo was describing. The results are very much in line with expectations. In other words, and the least privileged populations have lower proficiency than other populations, and female learners fare better in reading, whereas male learners fare better in mathematics. When you look at other factors, you realize what the impact is on indigenous populations as well as on migrant populations. Let me make a pit spot on such populations, not indigenous and migrant populations. In the 2025 report, we will innovate. We want more information about migrant population. Why? Well, because those assessments have a rather high margin of error. Indeed, the level of representation of such population in our sampling, which, by the way, was not designed with migrant populations in mind, are not sustainable. You can see here the participation of first-generation mobile students in the sampling that we were able to obtain in the different countries covered by this study. This is very much part and parcel of our education policies and has been so since those migratory flows have emerged. Therefore, we thought that we needed to innovate for the 2025 study. So, what are we going to do? Well, we are going to oversample, aka to rely on a higher sample in order to better understand what the reality of the populations is, and we are also going to include them in our context surveys or questionnaires, making sure that we will have a better understanding of the context in which learners and students from migrant communities experience. Here is a number of examples in order for you to better understand the aspects that we're going to take into account in our questionnaires. We asked about whether they are facing bullying or harassment in school, how teachers work with aspects of diversity in school. In other words, any aspect that would help us better understand why such students and learners fare better or worse in different subjects. Now, I know that I have very little time, so I would like to conclude by saying that even though we are talking about traveling or moving populations, it is important to better understand what their learning achievements are. Such criteria will help us better reach more sustainable results. The more we know about them, the more we'll be able to help them fare better. This will also be an approach that will help define multiple research issues, and it will help us better hone and design education policies that will take into account the specific needs of those populations. Of course, we are talking about a part of the population But we need to come up with the right approach. In order to do this, we need to have a cross-sector approach. We need to better understand what the links between those populations are with a certain number of issues. We are obviously faced with methodological issues. We don't necessarily have the right information. We're not always in a position to find this information, and we need to better understand these challenges in order to get more information and to better hone our education policy. Thank you very much. I will hand you back the floor. Yes, what you're saying is very important. Very important. We need to take all of those adjustment variables into account. Everything that has an impact on the education journey for all of those learners. Mobility is a key aspect. And any question that you might ask yourself in order to better design education policy does matter. So if you're okay, we are going to continue. I don't even remember which language I'm supposed to talk into.
Stephanie Leite, who is a program specialist here at the IIEP in quantitative research methods for monitoring and evaluating quality and learning outcomes, as well as education management information systems, ERCE. She is now the coordinator of the specialized courses on using learning assessment data to monitor SDG 4 progress. So over to you, Stephanie.
Merci beaucoup, Martine.
Thank you very much, Martine. I'm going to speak in French. So I'm going to try and be more equitable, both in gender and in language. I'm going to share my presentation with Eliane Solange, who is the Director General of Statistics, Planning and Forecasting at the Ministry of Education in Gabon.
Donc, lorsqu'on parle, c'est vrai, des apprentissages,
when we talk about learning, we need to talk about a number of factors, as was highlighted by my predecessors. We need to better understand what school factors are, learning factors are, that will have a way on learning. I'm going to talk to you about a new activity that we've been carrying out for 5 years, aka how to better take into account health and well-being education indicators into EMIS in West and Central Africa. It is a program that has been carried out in West and Central Africa since 2021. It brings together 23 countries, and initially when I launched this project in 2021, we only had 11 countries, to which 12 new countries joined ever since 2021, and I think that's a very positive sign, and this was made possible thanks to the signature of an agreement in 2023 in order to make sure that children and teenagers would be more healthy and better educated in this region. This was made possible thanks to the work of our colleagues here at the headquarters of IIT, but also the UNESCO office in Dakar. The idea is to provide technical assistance to countries wishing to integrate health and gender indicators into EMIS, but the overall goal is to make sure that our data is fully taken into account. The idea is not just to collect data, but on a one-time basis, but also to make sure that they are collected on a regular basis. This is mostly based on 4 global indicators. Number 1, a basic global indicators having to do with rules and guidelines. In order to make sure that learners do learn in good conditions, we need rules and guidelines to make sure that learning conditions are regulated and making sure that we can anticipate any issue that might arrive, as well as to remedy such issues. The second indicator has to do with 4.7.2 SDG 4, aka SEA percentage of schools that provide life skill-based sex and HIV education in the last school year. In other words, it needs to be carried out throughout the region or throughout the country. The third indicator has to do with carers and teachers. We need to make sure that teachers are fully taken into account, and we also need to come up with a guidance process for parents and carers. Those 4 indicators were steered globally by UNESCO about 10 years ago. You can find the reference framework here. Under the aegis of this regional initiative, which started in 2021, things have evolved between 2021 and 2025. So what have we done? Well, as I said, this program, the aim is to collect quality data, to analyze data and produce reports which are usable and relevant, and to use those results in planning and policy dialogue. So let me give you examples of what we have done in this particular region. Number one, the indicators have been included in the way data is collected. We have a lot of technical expertise when working with countries. The idea is not just to include a number of questions and indicators. The issue is to make sure that data collectors are fully trained, that the training is of better quality. And at APE, what we wanted to do is to make sure that we took into account what happened in each country. We wanted to improve the quality of data collected. We knew that we were faced with a number of issues having to do with the choice of indicators that would be taken into account. So that would be number one. Number two, you might argue that everyone carries out data analysis and report drafting. Well, that is not just what we do. We want to make sure that indicators in health education and well-being are generated and presented using standardized tables. We also try to standardize interpretation. We have also done a lot of work on the triangulation and disaggregation, as well as on trend. As I said, the data were integrated between 2022, 2023, and then 2024, and again 2025. We try to do this on the long run. As for the use of those results in the way planning is carried out, well, we have worked hand in hand with countries. We have drafted a technical information note that was a short document, only 5-page long, making sure that all of those results would be fully included. The idea is not just to draft recommendations, but also to work with stakeholders, to work with them in each country, and make sure that the right level of each ministry is fully involved. Our program's goal is not just to produce data nationally, but also, thanks to the ministry commitment signed in 2023 throughout the region, to make sure that we can measure a number of targets by 2027, and to make sure that countries collect information not only at the national level but also regionally. Within UNESCO, we have also done a lot of work to make sure that sectorial sector plans, both in terms of education and health, would take into account those data and indicators. Moreover, we also put a lot of focus on peer cooperation. So in a way, we work in a very straightforward way. We work progressively. As you saw, we have been working over time with a wide range of methodologies. And we also publish our results on the global UNESCO campus online. We also have a number of meetings to keep track with what's happening regionally. We also have a number of international consultations with different teams. And there will be a workshop that will take place in Nigeria in October if everything is fine.
Ok. Donc, à Eliane Solange-Roland-Gampira.
Now, I'm going to leave the floor to Eliane Solange-Roland-Gampira, who is a Director General of Statistics Planning and Forecasting at the Ministry of Education, Gabon. Gabon is one of the countries that have been participating in our project since 2021. Eliane, you have the floor.
Madame Eliane, tout ce séminaire. Donc, on vous invite à faire votre participation.
Eliane, you have the floor.
Merci, Martin. Merci, l'IPE de nous avoir donné
Thank you,
l'occasion
IIPE. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to give a presentation and explain to you what our experience was in the way that indicators were fully included into our program. Some words of background to start with. As part of the sectoral plan to combat AIDS, the Ministry of Education of Gabon did set up a committee to combat AIDS. The Ministry of Education, in order to better combat AIDS, created this committee called COLU-CIMEN, which was an organization whose remit was to raise awareness among students about the issue of teenagers and young people's health in schools. We both look at early pregnancy as HIV/AIDS, sexually transmitted infections, psychoactive substances, and abuse, violence, children's rights, etc. Even before Gabon became a member of this program, COLU-CIMEN and a number of other organizations were the only ones with an interest in that particular aspect. The Ministry of Education's General Directorate of Statistics Planning and Forecasting, which is responsible for collecting, processing, and analyzing and disseminating school-related statistics, was not collecting data when it comes to health and well-being in schools, and that was a real issue. That is the reason why Gabon joined the Regional Capacity Building Program for the integration of indicators on health education and well-being in schools in 2021, as Stephanie was saying. It also joined the program with about 20 managers from the General Directorate of Statistics, Planning and Forecasting and the General Directorate of School and Normal Education. Stephanie? By joining this program, we also carried out a number of activities. We started by updating the RSA collection tools in January 2022. We updated those tools because we were not able to understand those variables, and we're not able to better understand, to collect data specifically on health and well-being in schools. In order to do this, we took hold of the UNESCO indicators GC 2, 3, 4, and 5. We also created a specific training for the agents of the Statistics Directorate, as well as heads of decentralized school mapping departments and data providers. We offered specific training to make sure that all of our operators were able to better understand and better include all of this, all those aspects into their work. Starting 2021-2022 school year, we're able to start producing those 4 indicators in 2021. We included those indicators, we're able to reach to turn them into figures, and we were offered crucial tool. We had a number of data, but we found it quite difficult to disaggregate and disseminate those data with authorities. The technical note provided by IIPE helped us tremendously because it summarized all the necessary information. It was much easier for local authorities to take hold of that document and better understand the different aspects of what we expected. We were therefore in 2022 able to use that note to better disseminate our data. These are the first results that we have reached. So I'm going to be quite swift here. In 2021, 2022, during that school year, that school year was covered, and the 2023-2024 results are pending validation. We need the data to be assessed and validated internally. So it is pending validation.
Now, what the program provides, the benefits, because it really has had an impact on our system. So a lot of capacity strengthening amongst our agents. And then the fact that we integrated these tools and indicators also made it possible to raise awareness as to those who are providing us with data, because before they didn't really see why these data were important. But once we'd integrated these variables in our ERCE, once those were included, we shared this information, and it really allowed our suppliers of data to realize how it was linked to health and well-being in school. And it also helped us improve our geographic coverage. And so we had a considerable impact. Our results in the codes of conduct and the GC2 and GC5, these both indicators allowed authorities to make decisions to improve those indicators. And now looking at the table that we saw earlier, these indicators are below 50%. The first indicator, the percentage of establishments with a code of conduct, was so low in primary and secondary. Primary, it was 12%, and then 18% for secondary level on those establishments with a code of conduct. So 12% in primary, and then 18 in secondary, at secondary level. When we came out with these results, the authorities suddenly became aware of the situation. Because you have to observe that here, because this code of conduct, well, the general inspection provides a lot of overarching instructions, but then it's the principals who establish their own code of conduct depending on the school environment. And we realized that maybe half of the establishments didn't contextualize their code of conduct. They just kept it as it was. They added things, but it wasn't really contextualized, and it wasn't adapted to their own school. And so they had no document that would allow them to react to the problems that they had in their establishment. How to understand that you're managing an educational community, but so you have to go back to the basics. How do I solve a conflict within the establishment? And so this was a problem. And so the hierarchy, thanks to our indicators, became aware of the situation, decided that the school inspectors should not only examine the codes of conduct, but also to look at it in a secondary level, and that it would have to be validated by the boards of directors in the secondary school establishments. So this was a huge step forward, because we had a lot of trouble solving conflict, because in a lot of establishments, over half did not have an adapted code of conduct. suited to their own establishment. So we improved that situation, and authorities gave very clear instructions to improve the situation by introducing in the boards of directors of each establishment the examination and then the validation of the code of conduct. And this led the heads of establishments to contextualize their code of conduct so that it really would reflect the needs of that particular establishment. And then the second impact, this is for life skills-based sex and HIV education. When you look at GC5, a lot of teachers are trained to provide teaching on life skills, sex and HIV education, but most teachers didn't actually provide those classes for reasons we won't go into here. But this also showed the authorities that they had to make sure that these classes were given and not just saying it's going to be given because it's part of the syllabus. See, apologies. So the heads of establishments. And here you have outlook and expectations. So the bulletin, the indicators, and our expectations. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you to you. Thank you very much. And thank you to Stephanie and to you, madam. Your initiative extremely important to work in health and well-being and to integrate the indicators of health and well-being. Like you said, this made it possible to make important decisions that really had an impact in these areas. Thank you very much.
To all the panelists. We have 20 minutes to go, and I would like to come back to Dan to have there are some questions on the chat. You already answered some of them, but there is one that I think is important for you to elaborate more on the idea of the Gini learning, the Gini learning index. So the question I think is important is, could you speak more about how governments or non-government actors can use the GLEI to choose how to prioritize learning investments given the diversity of those at the bottom of the pyramid? So please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, panelists. This was incredibly interesting. And as always in such interesting panels, we never have enough time to cover everything or even a part of everything. So I do see a couple of comments that get at, I think, the heart of what I was trying to say, which is why do we need another metric like a Gini? What does it allow us to do? Should we spend time on it? And my sense is there are two things I did not say. One is that since really the beginning of the United Nations, most of the work that we have done in statistics and quantifying learning and education has focused on comparability across nations. And in the background, I didn't say this in my very short presentation, but just for all of us in this call that are on this webinar, this constraint of providing cross-national comparable data, which is a requirement of UNESCO because it's an intergovernmental agency, has led to some, problems with respect to within-country variation. Most of you on this call would understand that, certainly my co-panelists. And so new efforts have been made, and I would say that we heard this from the two Alejandros and from Pablo, at least particularly on learning assessments, that creates problems. And so why would you want to go for a Gini as potentially helpful? One is, I would say, I didn't say this in my talk, is that one of the problems we have in education is that it's difficult for us to talk to ministers of finance. We try to explain what we're doing and we ask for more resources to try to meet the needs. And one of the things economists do well is simplify their data. Very complicated data, they simplify it. And so one goal of the Gini is to simplify data in a way that helps. But it's not just simplification. The Gini actually looks at equity. It looks at differences across the board. One of the things that we have not done as well as we should, though my co-panelists, I think, are raising very important dimensions of it, and I think this was the question that was raised by Zorine Badrudin, sorry for the pronunciation, and that is, how does this matter? And how do we, as NGOs or policymakers in government, use a Gini to make a difference? And the reason why it matters is you can use any sample population using the Gini. You don't have to have a nationally representative sample, as do most of the international learning assessments. They do that, where comparability is considered to be very important. If your focus is on the poorest populations, then having something that is subnational and that looks at diversity in the subnational is very important, and allows us to focus on better interventions, I think. It's not the only way to go, and we're raising this really to push our colleagues within the UNESCO world, we're in the UNESCO world on this webinar, to think more about what happens in the classroom, what happens within minoritized populations, what happens within ethno-linguistic minorities and those who are under climate threat or even health threats. So that's my broad answer. We need to think more wisely and more carefully about differences within populations across the world. That's my
Thank you.
short
Thank you very much.
focus.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, now to Alejandro, because we have no, to Pablo from GEM that presented this very interesting initiative of the WIDE. One question would be, how do you think that all this data from WIDE speak to the educational practitioners? No? We have here a lot of people coming from different experiences on the world of education. So how do you think that WIDE could help them to improve the work they are doing?
Thanks. And again, I joined the words of Dan of thank you, my colleagues, for all these presentations, which are quite interesting. I think one key element for practitioners is to have a good diagnostic of the situation. A good diagnosis is a solid foundation of a good diagnosis. Diagnosis should be the starting point of any effective intervention. Sometimes this diagnosis is difficult to do because of lack of information or scattered information. What we have to do in GEM, along with our colleagues in UIS, with the Institute of Statistics of UNESCO, is trying to systematize and disseminate data in a comprehensive manner and make it easy to access and interpret. And that's the goal that not only with WIDE, but with other products that we're trying to do, to make it more accessible, to make it more democratic, if you will, to not make the data a privilege also of only some people. They may have the right context to access or the skill to access, but rather to have it in a source that is free and presented in a way that is easy, understandable, to make a good diagnosis of the situation that they're in. And I think a good element for this that WIDE has is not only the background for different type of inequalities, but also the ability to have trend data. Trend data is quite important because it shows you the evolution of a certain situation, of a certain problem. It shows you certain milestones that has happened with your progress in learning. I can help you identify years or situations where you need to pay more attention. So I would say for any people that is keen to doing intervention and programs, it's good to have good data to serve as a foundation to do your work.
Thank you very much, Pablo. And now to Alejandro from the CMO. So I saw that you presented a case where you analyze the impact of violence in learning indicators and others. Could you elaborate why, I mean, this is an important issue for the data you presented, and how do you measure that component of violence?
Yeah, thanks, Martin, for that question. This is something that is quite, I can say, unique in Southeast Asia, because within the region, for example, you have a double-tiered regional landscape where in one or two systems in this region, very low bullying, low prevalence, good learning outcomes. While on the other end of the spectrum, you have the majority of the countries, high prevalence of bullying, low learning outcomes, and really challenging situations. So with that kind of regional picture, what is needed that we're looking at is to be able to digest at the country level what indicators and what constructs actually measure, what is actually important for them to narrow the gap and improve in learning. So what we saw in 2019 was that the prevalence of bullying is somewhat varied in Southeast Asia. And so we captured this through our school questionnaire reported by the school leaders. And so there is a strong prevalence of bullying, at least 20 to 40% on average in Southeast Asia, where at least one occurrence of bullying every month has been reported. And if you zoom in to a particular country like the Philippines, for example, where 63% of bullying is quite high, that's 3 times the world average. What we're seeing is that these phenomenon reflecting the lack of system and monitoring at the country level that actually captures these things. Because in our case, we are actually receiving 90% response rates. So good sense of coverage and good sense of actual engagement from our respondents. But on the other hand, these kinds of phenomenon been there since, I mean, this is not a product of one singular phenomenon. It's a multiple layer of problems. So that's what learning assessment or essentially the beauty of learning assessment is. We're trying to unpack some of these phenomena that are typically outside of the bird's eye view of a policymaker, and we're trying to highlight and zoom in on these issues. This is particularly interesting because, as I've said, the Philippines is very high, but in some countries like Cambodia and Laos, for example, where yes, learning challenges are still there, but you have very low rate of bullying and other forms of violence. So these some of equity indicators of what we're trying to say in SEA-PLM is that if there are improvements in your contexts, it contributes essentially to learning. What we're seeing is that it drives around 20 to 30 point gap for if you try to improve your context and you try to highlight and elevate some of these indicators. So that's our experience, and that's what we're trying to also investigate further, and what other factors may have contributed to the learning situation. As I've said, Southeast Asia is very unique. It's very varied. And so what it takes for us as a region to actually narrow the gap, not only within countries, but more importantly, within countries.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you very much. Now to the other Alejandro de América Latina. Hay muchas preguntas sobre de qué manera
from Latin America. There are many
la
questions
ERCE,
regarding how the
incorporan otras
ERCE
variables adicionales
uses
a los
other
aprendizajes, ¿no? Si, por
variables on
ejemplo,
top of learning
además del
variables.
tema
For example,
migratorio,
on top of
se
the
siguen los
immigration
temas de
issue,
inclusión,
we
si
also talk
hay
about
análisis de la
inclusion.
situación
We
de
also want to see if there's
la,
analysis
la salud
of
y el bienestar, o si eso es
the
parte de
impact of
otro
health and
operativo, si es que
well-being
lo
of,
tienen
or if this is
del
part
sistema
of
de monitoreado
another
que tienen ustedes, ¿no?
areas that are
Y
not
una
part of your
pregunta también que me
monitoring
parece
system. And another question
importante es, en este contexto de tanta movilidad,
has to do
se
that in this
preguntan
context of
algunos de los asistentes
mobilization,
quiénes son los
one of
migrantes, ¿no?
the
En estos estudios.
attendants asks, who are the immigrants?
Perfecto, muchas gracias Martín por la pregunta. Había visto alguna de ellas en el chat. A ver, creo que en general este estudio que como yo decía lleva tantos años en la región y tiene una gobernanza en la cual los países
We have
participan activamente,
carried out
ha
such
estado
initiatives for
evolucionando en el
quite
tiempo y ha
many
hecho algunos
years in this
énfasis a lo
region.
largo de su historia. Solamente por centrarnos en los
We
últimos
have put
estudios que
a
son
lot
el
of focus
19 y
on those
y el del
aspects.
25,
As
ahí
for
aparecen
the
dos
two
innovaciones
latest
importantes.
editions,
A partir del
2019 and
19 empieza
2025,
un
they
modo
include
adicional a
two
los
innovations.
aprendizajes habituales,
Starting at
que es el modo de
2019,
habilidades socioemocionales, ¿no?
on top of
Esto es
traditional learning
una innovación que
outcomes, we
traemos
have
desde
also
Ginebra,
including
un poco
socio-emotional aspects.
previo
So this
a
is
lo que después fue el impacto del
a
COVID, que
very
declaró
specific addition
esta
to
temática.
the
Empezamos con unos pocos contextos
2019
en aquel
survey.
momento, nos
Then
dieron muy buenos
the
resultados por
COVID
regresión
pandemic
a
struck,
metodológicas
and this
comparadas y
had
también hubo
its
buenos resultados en
very
cuanto
specific impact. This is also
a
something that
resultados
we
en
took
sí.
into account
Y
into our
ahora en el
methodology.
2025 hemos profundizado
The
ese
results were
modelo
very
con
interesting.
nuevos
As
constructos. Así que
for
también
the
estamos expectantes a ver lo que va a surgir en
2025
áreas después de
survey, we have
posibilidad
added
con esa
another layer
metodología y cómo está
of
afectada
indicators, and we are
este
very much
estudio.
looking forward
Y,
to
y la
seeing
segunda
what's going to
innovación, que
come
es la
out
que
of
yo
it,
mencionaba,
especially
que es
all
la
those
de
years
incorporar una
that
mirada
have
más
elapsed
profunda
since the
con una
pandemic
aplicación
struck.
específica
The
que requiere
innovation that I was
estos
mentioning
cambios
was
metodológicos en el estudio. Con
highlight
respecto
on
a lo
the
segundo, que es
specific
cómo
populations that
identificar
made
a
it
la
necessary
población
for us to
migrante o
adapt
quiénes
our
son
survey. As
estos
to
migrantes,
your second
tiene que ver
question,
un
how
poco,
do I
como pasa
identify those
habitualmente con
migrant
cualquier
populations? Who
población
are those
especificar,
migrants?
también nos pasa con población en
Well,
discapacidad, también nos pasa con
as
población
always,
indígena, requiere
as
su proceso
with
y
the
el proceso
populations
del registro
of people
administrativo
with a
o en registros
disability
estadísticos
or
requiere un trabajo
underprivileged
metodológico muy
populations,
importante
we need to
porque
make sure that they
no
are
es
properly
no
reflected
hay,
in statistical
aunque se
data. And
recuerden
this
conceptuales, son
this calls for very specific
conceptualizar e identificar esta
statistical
población
work.
y una
Sometimes
vez que tenemos de acuerdo
statisticians
cómo
do
hacerlo
not
operacional.
agree on
Hay que
how to
lograr que los
identify and
estados den
categorize the
cuenta
population. And
de ese acuerdo.
the
En el
moment you
caso del
finally agree
ERCE,
on a
hay,
definition,
además de
we
que
need
tiene
to come up with the
necesita
best way
unos
to reflect
frameworks
this in
estructurados
statistical
una decisión
data.
operativa que
So here
estableciendo
we came
las
up with a
condiciones
framework,
de estudiante en movilidad
but
que
this was
incluye a los migrantes. Es
something
decir, ahí puede haber
that was only
migrantes,
made possible
refugiados, otro tipo de
thanks to a
movilidad,
lot of
pero el
debate
concepto es movilidad
on
y tiene que
what
ver con el lugar
traveling
de
or
nacimiento del estudiante y de los padres,
populations or
¿no? Esa es
mobile
una decisión
populations
que nos
meant.
puede dar estudiantes
This was based on
móviles de
where
primera
students were
generación y de segunda
born,
generación
where
y
they
así estamos
studied.
construyendo
For
ese
example, there
lenguaje.
is a number
Y de
of
dónde
students
viene
that are
las
considered as first
conexiones
generation or second
obligatorias
generation
que se dan en la
mobile
región en
students.
los últimos, permanentemente,
Their
pero con
origins
distintas
have to
instancias
do with
a nivel
migratory
internacional
flows in
en tres niveles
Latin
clave.
American regions over the past couple
Migratorios
of years.
en la zona de Centroamérica,
Internationally,
donde hay países que
migratory
tienden a tener
flows
una mayor
have
extensión de población
taken place
hacia el
towards
norte
Latin
y también lo que ha
America
sido en nuestra
from
región la corriente migratoria que
countries,
viene desde
from origin
Venezuela, que nos ha
countries.
acompañado como temática demográfica
We
en
also
los
had a
últimos
number
5
of refugees
a 10 años.
and migrants from Venezuela. This has had some impact on
Muchísimas
migratory
gracias,
flows within the
Alejandro.
region. Thank you
Nous
so
entendons
much, Alejandro.
pour finir cette webinaire pour
To conclude
estampiller
this webinar, Stephanie, Eliane, we have a question. What role can infranational systems play to make sure that this information system and statistics system can be more resilient? How can we make sure that the necessary impact that we describe eloquently by Mrs. Eliane can be a reality? Is the system only sustained by the national level, or maybe subnational? I'm not quite sure what you mean. You mean at the decentralized level in order to collect data? Yeah, the question is, what role do sub-national level authorities play in order to collect data? Is it something that falls onto the lap of subnational authorities or national authorities? How can we make sure that when it comes to health and well-being factors, how can we make sure that data is properly collected? Eliane, would you like to answer? Would you like me to do it? I'm going to start, and maybe Stephanie can add some information, just to give you information about how data are collected. They are collected centrally, but we rely on localized authorities. When we decided to carry out such collection, we made sure that proper training was offered to sub-national collectors. We, at the ministry level, prepare matrix and send it at a delocalized level. There, at the local level, authorities will collect data and then share them back with us. So feed them up to us, and then we look at them, we validate them in workshops, we validate them with our providers and with our hierarchy, and this is how we do it. If I understood the question. Yeah, no, it's very clear.
Fait travailler pas seulement le niveau concentré, comme disait, mais aussi le niveau déconcentré.
I think it's a system that is based not only on the centralized but also decentralized levels. Stephanie, did you want to add something? It is something that requires a huge amount of work. You need to collect data all the way from schools to ministries. Every single level is involved. You also need to make sure that data are then fed back down at every level in order to make sure that the data are properly used.
It's almost 4 o'clock, so I would like to thank you all, our panelists, for your presentations, also to all the participation that we have in this webinar from different parts of the world. That's very, it's a very nice motivation to continue working on this strategic seminar. And we will continue with a second strategic seminar, and I will give the floor to Muriel to close the webinar, saying when is the next one on this series that we have of 4 strategic seminars. Muriel.
Yes, thanks, colleagues, for all of those interesting exchanges. So after these sessions, we are going to send to you the recording and also all of the PowerPoints if you want to learn more and to follow up on what was presented. And yes, we will have our next strategic debate on the 1st of July. So that's easy to remember, 1st of July. And this one will be dedicated to strategies to improve learning equity and to prevent school dropouts. And again, we'll hear from experiences from different regions. So we hope that you will be able to attend and join. And please don't hesitate to share the information among your network. Thanks a lot.